2 more years of austerity or higher taxes if the UK votes to leave the EU. That's the warning today from the respected Institute for Fiscal Studies.
Of all of the economic forecasts we've looked at, nearly every single one of them has the British economy at least a little bit worse off in 4 or 5 years' time if we leave than if we stay in.
But Leave campaigners claim the report is biased, as the IFS is part-funded by the EU.
Also tonight, more petrol stations in France run dry as police confront striking oil workers.
The search for Mrs M&S as profits plunge at Marks and Spencer. And
the gold medalist, Jared Talon.
The DIY medal ceremony for the athlete cheated out of World Championship gold.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Alistair Stewart.
good evening. A respected independent think tank today delivered what could be the most damaging economic prediction yet for the Vote Leave campaign. The Institute for Fiscal Studies said if Britain left the EU, there would be slower growth, more cuts or higher taxes.
David Cameron welcomed the intervention, calling the IFS the gold standard of impartial forecasting. But UKIP leader Nigel Farage described it as another establishment stitch-up, pointing out that the organisation is part-funded by the EU. Here's our political editor, Robert Peston.
We're in that final leg of that hair-raising European journey. So will we choose exit from the EU? And if we do, will that be the fast lane to prosperity or to lower growth and more austerity? Paul Johnson and the Institute for Fiscal Studies, judge and jury of the government's financial health, are in no doubt.
We're pretty much in the firing line.
How confident are you that if we leave the European Union, the public finances will get worse?
We will eventually stop paying the £8 billion a year or so membership fee that we currently pay. But secondly, there'll be some effect on economic performance, on the size of the economy. There's almost complete consensus that that will be in the negative direction, particularly in the short run.
So although Brexit and the end of EU budget payments would swell the Treasury's coffers by £8 billion a year, this would be more than offset by the impact of a slowing economy because the Treasury would get less tax and would have to spend more on social security, which would increase the deficit or borrowing between £20 billion and £40 billion a year. And that would mean either 1 or 2 more years of austerity or bigger immediate cuts.
How big would those cuts have to be?
To still get to a surplus at the end of this Parliament, you'd probably be looking at cuts of additional £10 to £15 billion over the Parliament.
So perhaps for the first time ever, the PM, who flew overnight to Japan, is thrilled by warnings of a possible big future squeeze by his government.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies is the gold standard in independent, impartial economic forecasting and commentary in our country. It's accepted by every political party, and they couldn't be clearer that leaving the European Union will be bad for growth, bad for our economy, bad for jobs and bad for families' finances.
One of his own Treasury ministers begs to differ.
This is rehashing the absolutely ridiculous assumptions that have been put into other economic models. And I just think people are growing tired of hearing this endless kind of plague of frogs.
And the IFS isn't going to stop this bloke from tunnelling out.
It's another taxpayer-funded and EU-funded organisation using our money to tell us what we should think. Outrageous.
What's the last stop for the Great British Bus? Well, on this mystery tour, we won't know for a few weeks yet.
So, Robert, then just how credible is this warning and how much damage could it do to the Leave campaign?
Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies is normally regarded as the absolute final word on budgets and autumn statements and the implications for what's going to happen to our taxes and borrowing. So what they say normally does resonate, and you can see that the Leave campaign is rattled because part of their argument is that the IFS has been tainted by taking some money connected to the European Union, addressing as it were the man rather than the ball. Now, I have to say, however, that this forecast from the IFS does come with a greater degree of uncertainty than its normal projections, because there are enormous unknowns about what will happen when we leave the European, if we leave the European Union. That said, as the IFS pointed out, a vast majority of forecasting economists think we will be a bit poorer if we were to leave. Economists aren't always right. They were wrong during the boom years about the sustainability of the boom. So they could be wrong this time. It could be an example of the sort of Leicester City phenomenon, winning against the odds. But I have to say, you know, that doesn't, as I say, the majority of economists would side with the IFS.
Robert Peston, thank you.
France has started to fall back on its emergency fuel reserves as protesters continue their nationwide blockade of oil refineries. Around a quarter of petrol stations have run dry or are low on supplies. Well, tonight, as many British families are planning trips to the continent during half-term, the Foreign Office has warned of possible fuel shortages. From Calais, Neil Connery has the latest.
In Paris and across many parts of France, the fuel blockades are having a growing impact on forecourts. Drivers' frustrations are boiling over as petrol and diesel stocks run low. The French government insists there's no need to panic buy, but many motorists aren't taking any chances.
From last night until 1 o'clock in the morning, I searched with my wife for a petrol station. This morning, both of our 2 cars were on the minimum level of petrol, and we needed to drive our children to school and to go to work.
The trade union blockades over proposed labour law changes have become a test of wills with the French government. Oil refineries are being targeted, and the disruption is being felt far and wide. The government has been forced to delve into emergency petrol reserves for the past 2 days. This was the scene in Normandy, as one main route to the ferry port of Le Havre was blocked by protesting workers. In Calais, we spoke to some of the British tourists affected by the growing fuel shortages.
In the last 24 hours, we've been in probably nearly 5 stations. 20 euros here, 30 euros there. Some have limited you to 30 litres of fuel. A lot of stations are closed.
As we came through on the main route from Belgium into Calais, a couple of service stations on the main roads were out. The stations were open, but all the pumps were closed.
Ships carrying oil have been blocked at sea off the coast of Marseille as the protests spread. Well, workers here at one nuclear plant due to go out on strike in the coming hours, adding to a sense here that the government is under huge pressure. The French Prime Minister, for his part, insisting they won't back down. These proposed labour law changes will go ahead. There are nationwide protests planned here for tomorrow, and a real sense about the growing impact of these fuel blockades and industrial action as every hour passes.
Neil, thank you. And there's advice for holidaymakers heading to France on our website. Plus, there is an interactive map of which petrol stations are badly affected. Just go to itv.com/news.
And that growing crisis forced France's Interior Minister today to insist it wouldn't affect the security for Euro 2016, which kicks off in just over a fortnight.
Almost 100,000 soldiers, police and security personnel will be deployed in a country that remains in a state of emergency following the terrorist attacks in Paris. From there, our security editor, Rohit Kachru, reports.
Images like this don't shock here anymore, not after 7 months of high alert. This simulation by French security forces shows that for all their apparent faults, they can't be accused of being in denial. They've recreated the very worst case scenarios in an emergency drill. But France has been in a constant state of emergency since November. Today, the authorities revealed their plans for keeping 2 million football fans safe. An exceptional event in unique circumstances, they said. One evaluates all possible scenarios, all possible responses. I could envisage calling off one game if necessary. And to guard the army of football fans, an army and much more. 90,000 soldiers and police will be deployed across France. The opening game will be at the stadium attacked by terrorists in November. The celebrated security guard who stopped another bomber from getting in that night will be back guarding the stadium. This accidental hero says their system of checks and body searches will be adequate, but vigilance will be most important. Cup final day at the weekend was a test of their measures, but this doesn't compare to the challenges ahead. Not just 10 stadia, but hotels and fan zones, and the memory of what's happened here before. Rohit Kachru, ITV News, Paris.
Thomas Cook cabin crew have voted to strike in a row over brakes. The Unite Union says 74% of workers who voted backed industrial action. Talks are to be held with the airline next week, and Thomas Cook says plans are in place to make sure their customers can still go on their booked holidays.
And Shell is to cut at least 475 jobs in the UK and Ireland. The company has announced most of those affected work at Shell's Aberdeen headquarters. 2,200 jobs further are to be cut worldwide.
Now, the new boss of Marks & Spencer says the company needs to cherish and celebrate the ideal customer that he's named Mrs M&S. Steve Rowe plans to revive the company's flagging clothing business by cutting prices, improving style, fit and quality. But can he win back that elusive Mrs M&S? Our consumer editor Chris Choi investigates.
Who is Mrs M&S? The company aims to find out, then cherish and celebrate her. They want the loyal army of women shoppers aged 50 and over that they believe have been neglected for years. But these three potential Mrs M&S shoppers in Chester have big reservations.
I like the colour. I think the colour's really nice.
I like the colour. I don't like the style.
I don't like the
no,
style.
I don't like the style. I think it's quite dated.
I like them.
Yeah, very nice.
Yes. Nice
Because
colour.
you could wear that with a nice camisole underneath.
Yeah, it'd be nice on it. But it's nothing outstanding. It's just...
It's clear Mrs M&S will be no pushover when it comes to clothes sales.
Yeah.
You don't want to look
No.
frumpy.
Marks & Spencer is the UK's biggest clothing retailer with 32 million customers. 58% are women, 78% are over 35. Despite selling over 15 million bras and 4 million women's jeans last year, annual clothing and homeware sales were down 2.9%.
You can also see how we've increased the number of fits.
This is the new boss. Steve Rowe started on the shop floor 26 years ago. Now he's leading the search for Mrs M&S.
Mrs M&S is all around us. We describe Mrs M&S as our average customer. She's about 50.
Isn't the problem that if you say to somebody nowadays, you're Mrs M&S, it's not necessarily seen as a compliment?
She can be a busy working mum. She can be just approaching retirement. But she's got really great taste. She's got aspirations to have better experiences, better quality products.
He admits that Mrs M&S may have been put off by prices that are sometimes too high and by cluttered stores with outfits that don't have enough style.
All of these clothes are incredibly fashionable, but they're very wearable.
Today, the editor of fashion magazine Tatler had a warning.
If you referred to your best friend as, oh, she's a bit Mrs M&S, it might not be taken as a huge compliment. It's not exactly a huge aspiration at the moment. But what M&S do have is a fantastic reputation for reliability, for ethics, for great quality.
But if Marks & Spencer's strategy goes off the rails at this vital time, too many of its clothes will stay on its rails.
It is a store that has a special place in Britain's retail history, but high street fashion has become a brutally unforgiving marketplace. Now the M&S boss is getting tough. He'll be thinning out the range of clothing, simplifying store layouts and cutting many of the sales and discounts. Before it can capture Mrs M&S, this is a business that must first clear out its own wardrobe and give itself a whole new look.
Chris Joy, thank you.
Hundreds of Tata Steel workers protested at Westminster today as thousands of miles away in India, the company's fate was being decided.
Yes, their future still hangs very much in the balance as the Tata board considers bids for its UK operations. Our Wales correspondent Rupert Evelyn reports from Port Talbot, where most of those jobs are at risk.
On a station built from the very steel they produced, workers set off on another leg of their journey towards protecting their profession. The ultimate decision on their future is out of their hands, but there's no let-up in the desire to sell their skills to potential bidders for Tata's UK business.
We'll support the one that's best for Port Talbot and the rest of the plants, right? Strip products as a whole. It's got to be done as a whole. We know we got the steel making capacity in here, and we know we can produce good quality stuff.
We've got the skills, we've got the backbone and drive to keep the future of the industry going within Wales, and particularly within the Port Talbot plant. And I would be requesting and asking Tata, to sell the industry to the best people possible.
They took the sales pitch to London knowing that the fate of 11,000 Tata employees in the UK and many more who supply this loss-making business was up for discussion. Their plea, like their message, is consistent, and in London the workers find favour from some staunch supporters.
It's the basis of our manufacturing economy. It's got to be saved. The government has got to be prepared to intervene.
And so far the government is still seen to be on the same track, promising to do everything they can for the industry. Behind the scenes at Tata HQ in Mumbai, British officials have been pitching their ideas to sustain steel production. But Tata made it clear following their board meeting that no decision would be made today. They're still reviewing the bids for the UK business, and an uncertain future is left to roll on. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Port Talbot.
Police and protesters have clashed outside a rally for would-be presidential candidate Donald Trump. Inside it was just as raucous, with protesters disrupting the event and Trump fiery as ever, branding the media dishonest slime and Hillary Clinton lowlife. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports.
In the age of Trump, this is the new look of American campaign politics in 2016. Angry, chaotic, on the cusp of violence, and with tempers fraying on all sides. Outside his rally last night in New Mexico, demonstrators were burning Trump t-shirts, with riot police watching over it all, using tear gas to keep control.
This is so exciting, isn't it?
Inside, it was only slightly calmer. Multiple protesters interrupting the Trump speech.
Go home to mommy. Go home to mommy.
And he responded every time with his trademark mockery.
He can't get a date, so he's doing this instead.
His primary target was Hillary Clinton.
She has bad judgment, and she really does have bad judgment. Oh, isn't that nice? I'd get him out of here. Get him out.
Opinion polls suggest that as Donald Trump consolidates his control over the Republican Party, he is now virtually level with Hillary Clinton, making a Trump presidency no longer such an unlikely proposition. His next big decision is choosing a vice presidential candidate, likely to be announced in a further blaze of publicity. But the scenes yesterday in Albuquerque also make very clear that protesters are going to seek to disrupt his every move and make July's Republican convention a likely flashpoint for a candidate who thrives on incendiary and divisive rhetoric. Robert Moore, ITV News, Washington.
5 migrants have died off the coast of Libya after a wooden fishing boat holding around 550 people capsized. The Italian Coast Guard spotted the vessel in difficulty and approached it to hand out life jackets, but the boat immediately tipped over. A rescue mission was launched. Most of the migrants and refugees on board were saved.
Now, ahead of next month's EU referendum, we're travelling across the UK to gauge the views of voters in each country. Tonight, our journey takes us to Scotland, where around 4 million people are eligible to vote. It is thought of as one of the most pro-EU nations. 46% of its exports go there. The ruling SNP firmly backs the Remain campaign, but not all its supporters agree. And as our correspondent Martin Geisler reports from Stirling, others are just weary of yet another major vote.
The sheep auctions in Stirling are a lively place at this time of year. But this spring, the farmers have more than just their animals to discuss. Britain's agriculture industry has come to rely on Europe for a lot of its funding. And while there's no great love for Brussels here, there is a sense that leaving the EU could come at too high a price. Scotland's sheep farmers, by and large, seem uneasy at the thought of a Brexit.
I think agriculture in particular is very linked with Europe. You know, we've developed over all these years and become terribly reliant on them, although, you know, most farmers will argue that you know, some of the regulations from Europe are what's making their job so difficult. But I think, you know, we're so ensnared and ensnarled in the whole thing that leaving it would be a massive step.
Stirling is a good place to gauge opinion north of the border. It calls itself Scotland's heart. But it's a battle for Scottish minds that's raging once again, and the issue of independence is front and centre, as ever.
Put simply, the argument works like this. The SNP insists Scotland shouldn't be pulled out of the European Union against its wishes. So, if Britain as a whole votes to leave, but Scotland had voted to remain, they say that could be reason enough to hold another referendum on independence.
They're encouraging their members to vote to stay in, and given almost half the country supports them, it's a powerful rallying call. But not everyone's listening. Independence campaigner Gary Parker has just started a group called SNP Go, based, he says, on simple logic.
What's the point of having an independent Scotland if you don't control your waters, if you don't control your borders? It's not independent, it's Indy-Light. And so I want full independence for Scotland, and that's not because I'm anti-English or anti-Europe. I'm actually very pro-European. I just don't believe that the EU represents our wishes properly.
So get rid of the ties to Brussels first and then the ties to London after?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a hugely important moment for all of Britain. We're shaping the country our children will grow up in. But like all Scots, the mothers at this soft play group have faced 4 major votes in the past 2 years. There is a sense of fatigue at the same old arguments.
It's a distraction that is not needed. I think it's better to focus people on what the issue is, and it's whether to stay in Europe or not.
I don't want to have to keep thinking about, oh, are we going to be independent, are we not? Or are we going to be part of Europe, or are we not? Those are things I don't really want to have to think about. I've got an awful lot of other things to occupy my mind, and I just want to know what's happening, be settled and get on.
Let's get this one out of the way and get it done.
That's it. Yes.
So a battle-weary Scotland has one more vote to go. But if recent history here is any kind of guide, that may not be the end of the story. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Stirling.
Leicester City striker Jamie Vardy finally tied the knot today. Teammates and celebrities were pictured arriving at Peckforton Castle in Cheshire, where Vardy married Rebecca Nicholson. After postponing the wedding 3 times, Vardy was given special permission by the England manager Roy Hodgson to hold it today.
And finally tonight, the athlete who staged his own gold medal ceremony after being cheated out of his medal for years. Australian Jared Talent should have been crowned world champion in the 50-kilometre walk in 2011.
But he was beaten by 2 Russian dopers. And despite them both being disgraced, it could take months to get what is rightfully his. So Jared wasted no further time, as Duncan Golestani explains.
It is the moment every athlete dreams of, but usually the gold medal is real and doesn't come on a cushion from the sofa.
And the gold medalist, representing Australia, Jared Talent.
Talent finished 3rd in the 2011 World Championships, but the winner of his race has already been disqualified. Then yesterday, the silver medalist, another Russian, was included on a list of athletes suspected of doping. Friends decided it was time to celebrate.
Oh, they just thought it would be a fun idea to do it. So
It's going to be a long time before I get that gold medal from the 2011 World Championships. If it is taken off Denis Nezgorodov, it could be another year or so. So I'm heading away in a week, so I won't get to see those guys for a while. Yeah, I just thought it was a bit of fun.
Talent has already amended the record for his race. He is a strong and vocal critic of doping in sport, with good reason. At the London Olympics, he won the silver medal behind Russian Sergei Kudyapkin. Last year, he was found guilty of doping. So in a few weeks, Talent will receive his long-awaited gold at a special ceremony in Australia. He's hoping for that there's an actual podium. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
Go, Jared. That is all for now. Tom Bradby will be here with news at 10.
But for now, from all of us, good evening. Bye-bye.